Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and just this morning, there was a resignation out of the Trump administration that's interesting to a lot of us. Nikki Haley, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, resigned. She did a press conference with the president in the Oval Office. She said that she had actually told the president she'd probably only serve 2 years, and by the end of this year, it will be 2 years for her. That's when she'll leave the administration. And it was so interesting to me because I was at a conference over the weekend. On Friday, our very first speaker for the conference was Nikki Haley. And she was just awesome, so impressive and wonderful, and very supportive of the president, saying that she often disagrees with him and will say so, but she would also go to the UN and disagree with dictators. So she's kind of tough that way. She said a couple of the comments she made about her relationship with President Trump. One was that Trump is great when you put him with leaders. So the strategy, I guess, is to put Trump with the leader and let him do his negotiating, which he's so good at. And then she also said that when President Trump asked her to fill that position at the beginning of his administration, he had already asked her to be Secretary of State. She said no to that, came back and asked for this job. So we don't really know why she stepped down, except to say that she felt she needed a rest. She thinks people shouldn't stay too long in the administration. And so she will be leaving at the end of the year. Well, another strong and very delightful female leader is with me on the line, and I'm so glad to have her. Her name is Trayce Bradford, and she is president of Texas Eagle Forum. She served before this position as president of Dallas Eagle Forum, and she founded Tarrant County Eagle Forum. So Eagle Forum, as most of you know, or many of you know, is the organization founded by the late Phyllis Schlafly. And Phyllis certainly was a frequent guest here on Point of View and a pro-family leader. And Trayce is there leading that organization, which is very strong in Texas. And one of the things they do is work with the legislature in Texas, and she has begun doing that in 2013, 15, and 17, and I'm sure we'll do the same thing in 19. And she also is just a prayer warrior. She leads and participates in intercessory prayer teams for our country, political leaders, and pastors. And the other part about Trayce is she homeschooled her 7 children. 2 of them are still in the home being educated by her. So it's quite a set of accomplishments. And Trayce, thank you so much for being with me.
Oh, thank you, Penna, for having me. I'm very excited to get to touch base with you again.
Well, I'm glad. I haven't actually seen you for quite a while, but I follow what you do. And I read The Torch, which is the Texas Eagle Forum newsletter, and also emails that I get. So I keep up to date on the issues. And, you know, when I think of Eagle Forum, I think about well-educated and active citizens who know their issues, work to get laws passed. And one important part of that, Trayce, is getting the right candidates to run and be elected, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am, it is. And something that Phyllis, I just felt like it was an absolute must with her, was she wanted you as a volunteer to be a credible resource, whether it was working on legislation or helping to vet candidates. And she was such a great example of that. And one of my first interactions with her, I'd been told, you do whatever Phyllis says, don't ask questions, just do it. And about an hour later, she looked at me, and Senator Cruz at the time was visiting at our Eagle Council, and she looked at me and said, get him in his seat. And I thought, okay. And I went over and said, sir, I'm told when Phyllis Schlafly tells you to do something, you do it. And he says, I'm nothing if not obedient. And he came over and sat down, and Phyllis smiled. And 3 hours later, at the end of the dinner, I'm walking out, and she looks at me and she says, now get him in a Senate seat.
Yeah.
And I just thought, so typical, of her. And it just was so delightful for me to see somebody. I mean, she pays attention. She did to so many details. And, thank goodness there were a lot of hardworking people that got Ted Cruz in the Senate seat. But she, the thing about Eagle Forum is strong foundation. We just got back from D.C. last week, and the women that have been there, that have laid this foundation and are still there working. When you said educated, yes, ma'am. I mean, that is what impresses me so much, is how much these women do take the issues to heart, and men in the group. And that was something to me that was always expected from Phyllis. If you're going to talk about a subject, do your best to either know what you're talking about, or if you can't answer those questions, be able to find that successful resource that can.
Well, let me just ask you this right now then, because I don't want to not do this before the end of our interview. If people, I find you a great resource during the legislative session to know what bills, where they are, what's out there, what we can do to support them, who to call. And so how can people get hooked in with you and to get ready for the legislative session?
Well, thank you for sharing that. And that's a passion of mine, because I look at this as Texas Eagle Forum, not just me or not just a few of us, but really wanting to engage people around the state and even around the nation when we have issues. And we do have our website, but signing up for our emails is probably the best way through our website, which is texaseagle.org. And we already will be starting up like we did last session. We found this worked really well. Every Monday, we sent out 5 action items for people to take and be a part of, and we try to give you as much information as possible. I encourage people even through there to kind of own some of this themselves and go start their own list on the Texas legislative online process where they can follow bills themselves. So we want to educate, and we also want to encourage people to be activated. We also, through the torch, try to keep people up on whatever issues are coming. We're working right now on our list. We're starting to go to different events. I think people will probably see around the state groups come together and present their list of priorities. We will have that list up on our website. Also, like I said, through the email and our Facebook. We've actually tried to get a little better. I'm kind of the dinosaur with the social media, but we have a young lady that's helping, actually several that are helping bring me into that
so
era.
However people like to communicate, they can be updated by Texas Eagle Forum during the session, whether it's through Facebook, Absolutely. Email. And the torch is great, but during the session, that's every day is important.
And that was one of the things we found. If people could anticipate that Monday email, then we could fill in any action items that came up throughout the week. But they knew they could start with those 5 items on Monday and engage them right away. And then we would have on Wednesday, someone would be writing from their perspective. That was more of an encouragement during Wednesday. And then on Friday, we'd have a quote from a legislator. So we were trying to touch base with them all week. Because it goes so fast, too.
It does go fast.
7,000 pieces of legislation in a few months.
Texas legislature meets 5 months every other year. If you don't know that, ladies and gentlemen, my guest is Trayce Bradford. She is president of Texas Eagle Forum. After the break, I'm going to ask her what are the top priorities, what are the 2 or 3 top issues that Texas Eagle Forum will be working on. We will do that right after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
These last few weeks have provided all of us with an education about memories. How well do we accurately recall events that took place decades ago? What have scientists discovered about true and false memories? We may never know how many of the memories that have been cited and even presented in the Senate Judiciary Committee are accurate, but we do have some data that suggests that the memories of people who testify in trials are often not as accurate as we might believe them to be. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus is a cognitive scientist and law professor who has studied the subject of memory for the last 4 decades. On my radio program, I cited one study of 300 people in this country who went to prison for crimes they did not commit. They were later exonerated by DNA evidence, and of those 300 who were imprisoned, 3/4 of the convictions were the result of false memories. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who has followed other stories in the news. You might remember the story of Jackie that appeared in the pages of Rolling Stone. She claimed that she was gang raped at a fraternity at the University of Virginia. The story was not true, and Rolling Stone had to apologize and remove the story. Dr. Loftus has found that it is even possible to implant false memories. Her research team, while guided by an ethics committee, was able to plant in participants all sorts of false memories. For example, being attacked by an animal or witnessing a demonic possession. Various other researchers have discovered the same problem with memories. They suggest that our brain pulls together pieces of memory and sometimes creates memories of events that never took place. This doesn't mean that we should never trust memories, but it does mean that if you're on a jury or if you're watching people recounting something from their past, you should be skeptical and look for corroborating evidence. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hi, this is Lee Strobel, author of The Case for Christ and my new book, The Case for Miracles. You know, one of the best ways that we can grow in our ability to understand why we believe what we believe is to get an ongoing dose of God's truth into our lives. And one of the best ways of all to do that, Kirby Anderson does a tremendous job of giving us a regular diet of evidence, of logic, of God's truth from His Word, so that we can continue to do what 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks us to give the reason for the hope that we have, and to do it gently and with respect. So I am a huge fan of Kirby. I'm a huge fan of Point of View. I know that you probably are as well. That's why you're listening, and I hope you'll get behind them, support them, so that this ministry can continue on into the future and flourish even more next year than this year.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
I appreciate those words from Lee Strobel, and it is very important that Point of View remains strong. There's really a massive cultural sort of assault on Christian values. We've got to be able to counter that, and so we appreciate all gifts. And last week was our Truth Team, but we are continuing to emphasize giving, and just hope that you will be a part of our ministries. Trayce Bradford has been in the past. She's always been I would say, a supporter of Point of View in big ways, many ways. And Trayce, you know, I've got an article that I posted at our website, Texas is Turning Purple. And, you know, I mean, Texas has been reliably conservative And I don't know, it's one that can be debated, really, that premise. But we've been reliably conservative, but we are a target of the left. And we are, since we're so prosperous here, a lot of people are moving in from other places in the country. So what do you see as far as Texas remaining red?
It's very interesting you said that about the turning purple, because we were having that discussion just recently, and that it's not quite as red as we would maybe like to think, because there is a push. I hear over and over from either groups that work around the states and on legislation and have helped us say, as Texas goes, as goes the nation. And they say that with legislation, they say that with trends. And so what is concerning is to see people, even people that we consider conservative, starting to lean more to the left, or you see a lot of people with signs in their yards, and then you'll see a Beto sign with an Abbott sign. And it's, yeah.
I think there was a push to get those signs in yards, wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And, it can be frustrating, because you want to be activated, and you want people to vote, and you want people to engage. But we also have to own it ourselves, each person. So you need to do the research on those candidates, and it doesn't take that much. You can go to our website. You can go. There are a number of groups out there. I'm so thankful for all the groups we can work in coalition with, because it makes us stronger connecting together on issues like the life issue or religious liberties. And to hear this one friend that works all over the nation and actually has a heart for Texas. He was concerned this last session. Even he said, people think Texas is so mighty and red. I'm a little concerned they're more purple, and we don't want to head towards blue, which would be, the oxygen cut off.
That's definitely the goal of the left, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, we saw, you see it come in a variety of ways. And I think they're getting much more overt and much more, maybe it's the fear driving them, but you have to try to keep a conversation or a debate on the subject. It becomes very, very difficult, even in hearings where you're really trying to debate what's in the bill. It turns into more or less kind of a theater time for groups to put on their show. And it's
we've seen a lot of that lately, not only in Texas, but in the nation's capital.
Yes, and it's disheartening. And you do see people who are very strong in working and volunteering, and sometimes those things start to take a toll. I saw a lot of that through friends and even myself. You're going, why am I doing this? I could be home with my kids all the time. But you realize that is why we do it. And we do need to be a voice, and sometimes it can be very difficult when people, because you disagree on what sex the person is based on science and God's word, you therefore immediately are a hater and a bigot, and you're like, wow, that's news to me. But, trying to stay in the fight and keep the fight on what the fight should be about. It's not about personal. It's not about attacking. It's about truth. And that is really what Eagle Forum, to me, stood for and has stood for. And it's what I think is the most important thing that we can be doing. And when you bring legislation, or like you said earlier, you're looking for a candidate, it is, we want to know we have people that have a spine, that can be strong when it gets hard, and that they are willing to stand on truth. And truth is not relative. It is truth. And that's the hardest thing right now, I think, is keeping that at the front of the discussion, and not backing off, and not getting into a fight, a war of words.
Trayce, what would be like maybe the number one or two issue that I know that this can be in flux, but thinking ahead to the session that starts in January, you'll have, all the new legislators and hopefully a lot of ones that we love reelected. What are you going to work on? What are going to be your top two priorities?
Good question. One of the things about Eagle Forum is they're into everything.
Right. So I know that's a kind of a hard question. Give me a couple though of ones that are important.
I think I learned pretty quickly. You see the other groups that you can partner with and agree with. And so for us, we saw a hole on something I'm very, very passionate about and have been for years, was human trafficking. And that actually the Attorney General's office reached out to us and asked if we would help get the word out about how anyone can be helping on this issue. And I think what people don't see with the trafficking issue is, one, the numbers, and how Texas is a port city, and Houston is one of the largest entry points in the world for trafficking victims. Wow. But I don't think people understand, as I've done more and more research, that this one issue ties to terrorism and how they're now trafficking people because they can raise money. It's a very lucrative business. It impacts immigration. They're seeing that people are actually trying to come through immigration and do it through the proper channels, and some of these people are getting diverted to traffickers, and that was something from the federal level they're looking into. So it impacts religious liberties. If you want to be a part of a group that reaches out to these children, that the number of kids that go into trafficking through foster care is outrageous. I think they said up to 80%. And so you want to, I will say the governor's task force is doing a really good job on this, and the Attorney General's office is doing an excellent job. We are now one of the states that have some of the best laws in the country, but there's still some things to do, and especially as it relates to children. And you can't have a child prostitute. And when you look at, a child cannot agree to this situation.
Right.
So there's a lot that it flows into, and even just we're working on legislation. We've always kind of taken the piece of the pie that was we call it Texas Strong, which has to do with anything that's national security related as it pertains to Texas. And so the grid will be something we're going back again, and hopefully this time, since the federal level is recognizing and coming back with saying this is an issue and it does need to be taken care of, we're hoping that helps us on the ground here to secure our grid. And for people that don't know, Texas is the only state. There's 3 grids, and Texas is the only state that has basically almost their entire state. We have our own grid.
We have our own, yeah. All right. Well, Tracey, I will mention, ladies and gentlemen, that you can go to pointofview.net and click through to Texas Eagle Forum, and you can find the Torch, the summer issue, describes this sex trafficking initiative that Attorney General Ken Paxton has brought forward, and just explains the issue a little bit. And, Eagle Forum is so good at educating, as we mentioned at the beginning. So we will get an education on this issue, and I think it will be very important. One of the things you can see in this issue is how to recognize it and report it. So, Tracey, we're going to have to come to you periodically during the session, if you don't mind, so we can keep people up. Since we now have this hour that really is strictly to Texas, we'd love to have you if you're willing to come join us a few times.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Anything that we can do to help motivate people and get them connected in the process, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll be right back.
It's called normalcy bias, and studies estimate around 70% of people suffer from it even after disaster strikes. Normalcy bias says even though things might look bad, somehow everything will continue as it always has. But in times of great threat, that assumption can be deadly. If freedom is to be preserved, people like you and I have to work just as hard as those who are trying to restrict religious freedom, those who reject the godly wisdom that brought us liberty. Point of View has been a beacon of truth for more than 45 years, but we dare not assume that will always be the case. Be the fire in our beacon today. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Take a few moments right now and visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Be among those who see the threat and take action. Be a beacon of truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for sticking with us today on Point of View. We've been talking a little bit on the program today about Texas not necessarily being reliably red all the time. Big effort by the left to turn it purple. And I've got an in-studio guest to talk about this. It's special to me because he is actually my state representative in District 66, which is Plano, Collin County, and far north Dallas. And he has been, how many terms have you served, Matt?
So I've 2 terms so far. Okay,
this is Matt Shaheen, and Matt is, one of those conservatives that you can rely on, a person of faith, goes to Prestonwood Baptist Church, deacon there, and so, it's just nice to be able to sit and talk to you about the issues that Texas faces, Matt, because we put an article up, Texas is turning purple, and I'm not saying that it is, but I'm saying that there's a risk there, isn't there?
Yeah, there definitely is a risk. I think what you see throughout the state of Texas is we're probably, the Republican Party, your Republican candidates, are taking this November more serious. There is a conservative effort by the Democrats. And the areas that they're being successful, I think, is everybody's really focused on is the U.S. Senate race, Ted Cruz versus Beto O'Rourke. We shouldn't take our eyes off the fact that our governor, Lieutenant Governor Ken Paxton have really healthy leads. It's just this U.S. Senate dynamic that I think everybody's looking at, and we should, right? The polls are a little bit tighter. I think what we need to think about is we just need to run a good, solid campaign, whether you're a state rep like me or a U.S. Senator like Ted Cruz. I think what Senator Cruz is dealing with, quite frankly, is you have Hollywood that's made Beto O'Rourke this, really this Hollywood figure, this celebrity, right? He's been on late night shows. He's been on Ellen DeGeneres, that type of stuff. So I think that has a little bit of a different dynamic than maybe some of your other races.
I think so, and I think Texans that care about conservative values in Texas probably wouldn't be swayed by all of that, but I think they need to be talking to their friends who are maybe not as steeped in politics and are, the romance of it all in a sense, because the left, he is very far to the left.
Oh, yeah.
And the left, right now is so radical and sort of distasteful in the way they act, but he's not. He seems like a nice guy, and when you see him on TV, he comes off well. But when you start to ask him about his positions, it is radical.
Yeah, he really doesn't hold your traditional Texas values, to your Texas viewpoints with respect to whether it's economic issues, health care, certainly the Second Amendment. He has gone as far as to say he wants to abolish ICE. He made some very disparaging, unfortunate remarks against our law enforcement, comparing them to Jim Crow. But he does that, again, because when he makes those kind of radical left remarks, he gets a ton of money from New York City and Hollywood. So you'll probably continue to see him do those things. So, again, we need to stay on the foundation of our principles, because our principles align with the vast majority of Texans, and so we just need to be focused on those principles.
Matt, because of the success of Texas, because we have such a good climate for business, we've grown. We know in the area that you represent, we've had big businesses, lots of them move into the state, and it's wonderful. It's great. It causes problems like traffic and other things, but for the most part, it's the sign of a prosperous economy. But one thing that happens and accompanies that is people that come from more liberal parts of the country. Like, for instance, Toyota came into Plano. Right. I grew up in California near Toyota headquarters. Lots of my friends' parents were executives there. They brought some California values with them. And that's something we have to contend with, isn't it? Yeah,
there is a fact, what you're saying with respect to whether it's Toyota, Liberty Mutual, FedEx Office, J.P. Morgan Chase. We've had, just in my district alone, we've had the influx of corporations, and it is due to the conservative economic policies of the state of Texas. Low taxes, we don't have an income tax, low regulation. We just have a really great business environment. So, yeah, we do have to contend with the fact that people are moving in from other states, from other liberal states. And yes, there are some more liberal folks moving in, but you also need to take into consideration that a lot of the people that are moving in, like for a job at Toyota or Liberty Mutual and so forth, a lot of them are professional people, educated, which that demographic, quite frankly, tends to be more conservative Republican. For example, we've been looking at voter data, and just in my district alone, I have 1,000 new Republicans that we've identified, right? We've looked at the state that they came from, their voting history, all that kind of stuff. I'm personally either knocking on their door, calling them, or, they're going to meet me soon.
You're good
before
about
November
that.
6th, yeah. And so, we do have people coming in that we have to contend with. But again, our message, our principles are pretty darn powerful.
Let's open up the phones, 800-351-1212. If you would like to speak with Matt Shaheen, state representative, maybe about what issues he's concerned about. And I want to ask you that, Matt.
Yeah.
The session starts in January. And what would be your number one top issue you'd like to see move forward?
Probably the number one issue is going to be property tax relief. It's something, my campaign, we've knocked on over 6,000 doors already. So I've talked to a lot of different voters. Property tax relief is probably top of mind. Efforts in the past have been blocked. A lot of that has to do with some of the leadership within the Texas House that is going to change this next session. The governor, lieutenant governor, have been very vocal with respect to their support of property tax relief. And my constituents have been pretty vocal on property tax relief. So,
you think we're going to get much more conservative leadership in the House?
Without a doubt, we will. Right now, you have 5 people that have publicly announced for speaker. There's probably another dozen or so that are running. They just haven't told anybody yet. But what the Republican caucus has agreed, the 95 members of the Republican caucus has agreed that we're going to get together and we're going to choose who our candidate is, right? So the idea is to come in united with who our candidate is versus historically what happened, I guess it's been a dozen years ago, is that you had the whole Democrat caucus with, a handful of Republicans choosing the speaker, and the consequences were as you could predict.
So many things were never brought out for a vote in a House that would have passed things. So that will be fun to watch, I think, and be involved in. What else? What other?
We're hearing a bunch of different things. I'm hearing a bunch of different things. Public safety is still an issue with respect to our border. The state of Texas, my voting record is pretty clear with respect to we're putting assets on our border to keep our families safe. We know we have significant issues with gangs crossing our border, drugs crossing our borders. Not a lot of people realize that the Texas border is actually the number one entry for human trafficking for our nation. They're coming through Texas. So we actually spend out of our state budget $800 million of taxpayer dollars, Texas taxpayer dollars on our border. So that's a big issue.
So that's really supposed to be a federal issue, but we have to take it upon ourselves.
Yeah, it really is, especially with the Obama administration. Previously, they weren't stepping up. They were politicizing the border. We're hoping for, obviously, more support. We're seeing some more support from the Trump administration, obviously. Then I think the other issue that we're going to contend with that we're hearing a lot from voters is education. So education is a really interesting dynamic. That's our largest line item in our state budget. We have $80 billion that go towards education. That's both K through 12 and college. $80 billion if you look at our budget. Wow. And we have because of this growth that we're talking about, we have 80,000 new students every year that increase our enrollment. So it's a big line item. How we fund it, the formulas, those types of things, penalize a district like mine where we're property tax rich, and so the Plano ISD will end up sending Austin $150 million to then be distributed out throughout the state of Texas.
So that's called Robin Hood.
That's called Robin Hood. I'm adamant on ending it. There's a larger and larger group of us that want to end Robin Hood, totally revisit the way we finance schools, because we have some school districts that are doing crazy things. We literally have a school district that built a nine-hole golf course. We literally had a school that built a water park. We need to be focused on educating our children, bringing them the next best education we can provide.
So we don't want to force districts not to be able to do good things in education.
Right. Yeah.
But there also has to be. Some districts need help, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. The way the challenge always is our funding vehicles property taxes, and the Texas Constitution says we got to provide equal education. Well, property taxes is an unequal vehicle, right? So we're going to have to look at the equations and how that works with a property tax rich area like mine versus, the Rio Grande Valley and those types of things.
Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Shaheen is with us. We are talking Texas politics, Texas issues. Give us a call if you'd like to join us, 800-351-1212. And I do want to mention, because, we're looking at the state of Texas, but as we look at what's going on in the entire nation, and I even think, we could focus on some of the craziness in Austin, Texas, but there's really a massive liberal assault on our values these days. And that's why Point of View becomes even more important, I think, continuing on into the future. So just listen up for this message. You'll find out how you can help keep us broadcasting this program. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The U.S. Department of Justice recently announced that it will update the U.S. Attorney's Manual, creating a new section giving special attention to religious liberty. Updates to such a manual are sometimes viewed as routine, but they tend to reflect the values and priorities of the Department of Justice and function as a sort of roadmap for the department's coming years. The updates announced in the new manual requires the nation's U.S. attorneys to not only identify a dedicated point of contact on litigation having to do with religious liberty, but also requires coordination of any such litigation directly with the central office in Washington, D.C. In other words, Attorney General Sessions is announcing that his office will be very hands-on in lawsuits involving our first freedom. When the Department of Justice announced the updated U.S. Attorney's Manual, then Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand explained, quote, "Religious liberty is an inalienable right protected by the Constitution, and defending it is one of the most important things we do at the Department of Justice." Clearly, the days of abandoning protections in the law for religious liberty, including bipartisan laws like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, may be a thing of the past. The critical leadership of the Attorney General and his staff to protect religious liberty for all Americans will do much to strengthen all of our core freedoms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Well, I'll give you multiple reasons to get to Point of View. Number one, let's just talk about radio in general. Radio is the only medium that you can actually do something and listen to at the same time. That's not true with other medias. So you can actually work or do whatever you're doing around your house and yet still hear what you need to hear on radio. So I advocate radio as a great medium for getting the gospel and other things, other information out to Christians and hopefully new Christians alike. If we don't support them, I'm not convinced those messages will get out in the future.
Thank you for your program. I am a team member, and you have opened my eyes to the truth.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
face it, ladies and gentlemen, we believers, we Christian conservatives, we don't own the media. We don't have a lot of outlets for us, but Point of View is one that's been reliably here for many years, and we must retain that ability to speak to listeners about the issues that are so important. We must do that with excellence and attention to the sweeping changes taking place in the movements and institutions of our country. So we are just asking that you would dig deep and think about and pray about what God would have you do to help Point of View. Matt Shaheen is with me. He is state representative, and he goes to Austin every legislative session and represents District 66. And I'm so proud to call him my state representative. Matt, you're a hardworking legislator because you go door to door and talk to people about the issues. I think that is one of the things that makes you so effective, because you're able to find out what people want, and you can also educate people. It goes both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It's something that we're very focused on right now. I started knocking on doors actually back in June. And so, like I was saying earlier, my volunteers, we're approaching like 6,000 doors that we've knocked on. And you really get a good sense for what's on people's mind. And what really interests me, again, we were talking about Penna, all the new companies that are moving to the district, all the new people. We've got a significant amount of my district of people not only new to Texas, but new to the United States. So we have a lot of people that have Asian backgrounds, Indian backgrounds. They've come here for the opportunities, that type of stuff. And I love talking to that audience, if you will. I'm the grandson of immigrants myself, so I have a story that they can relate to, and I love to interact with them. And although they might be from China or the Philippines, they actually, when you start talking about Texas values, they line up really nice.
So in a way, you get to educate them because you can help them see that your values are Texas values. And it's an opportunity when they first come. I think of some of what's going on now with populations as a mission field. We don't have to go anywhere because people are coming to us here in Texas. So that's really
we actually have a number of stories. Obviously, the vast majority, maybe if not all my team are Christians, love the Lord, and we actually have a lot of stories of meeting with people and you end up praying together. We have some really neat stories.
All right, there's one issue I want to ask you about because I was just in North Carolina at a conference, and we heard from the lieutenant governor there, Dan Forrest, and in their state they had a big, battle over those bathroom bills, over privacy issues. And in the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, opened up bathrooms to whatever gender you felt like that day. At the state level, they got very concerned about it, so they passed something called, I think it was HB 2, which then brought the state back to sanity with regard to bathrooms. You enter the bathroom of the sex that you are, and there's not all that confusion. Well, in Texas, we tried to protect our kids' privacy with legislation, and it hasn't happened yet. So what do you see? It's been prevented partially because of the liberal leadership in the House. What do you see happening perhaps this session?
Yeah, there's a couple dynamics there. One is we need to remember that that all got started in Texas because the Houston City Council made an effort to do that. And then you had, I think it was maybe 3 ISDs that tried to pass policies like that. And so it'll definitely be revisited. The interesting dynamic that's not there anymore that I think a lot of people are forgetting is, remember Obama's, I think it was the Justice Department actually sent out a letter saying, I mean, it blows my mind. Their letter, because I read it, literally said, there's a possibility that we will withhold food for the needy for your school food system if you don't pass this type of policy. And obviously, the Trump administration.
So open up the bathrooms for little kids.
Well, but just
gyms,
the fact that
locker rooms.
But just the fact that they were going to withhold food for needy children was just crazy. I think the way we'll end up tackling this in the state of Texas is just pass legislation that tells cities, tells school boards, hey, don't tell people where to go to the bathroom. Texans are pretty darn smart and they know where to go. And the government was not created to tell people that. So I think we can actually put that to bed without like a bunch of controversy.
Okay, well, let's see. What else? I noticed that you have been concerned about the Texas Film Commission.
Yeah.
Different states attract Hollywood types for the film industry, but they do it sometimes with money.
With taxpayer dollars. Yeah, I don't think a lot of your listeners realize that, the state of Texas, as red or conservative as we are, we actually take taxpayer dollars and we pay, Hollywood producers, actors, whatever, to come to Texas and produce movies, produce commercials, video games, those types of things. And at first glance, somebody can say, well, gosh, that creates jobs, it's good for the economy, that kind of stuff. It actually isn't. The Texas Comptroller actually did a study and realized, when you look at it, it's quite obvious, but realized that all the jobs that they were creating with those dollars were temporary. So in other words, you'd come, film a commercial for a couple of weeks, and then you were gone. So everybody's job just disappeared. Or you make a video game for 6 months and you roll it out. Well, those jobs are now gone. Same thing for a movie, those types of things. So it's a frustrating point. I've actually introduced legislation the last 2 sessions to kill that. At one point during the budget process, I actually wasn't able to kill it, but I took all the dollars out and placed it somewhere else, but it got added at the last minute. So it's just a really, really inappropriate use of taxpayer dollars. And just the fact now that you couple that with just how Hollywood is just openly attacking our values and those types of things, it's just really inappropriate to be taking tax dollars and giving it to either Hollywood or... The other thing that was really interesting is we looked at the commercials that were being produced, and clearly, there were commercials like made by H-E-B Grocers or Whataburger. Those were obviously going to be made in the state of Texas to begin with. So I question even the incentive piece of it.
Well, I noticed, Matt, first of all, tell people how they can find out more about you and get in touch with you.
Well, so I have a website out there, mattshaheen.com. Shaheen's not the most common name out there, so it's spelled S-H-A-H-E-E-N. And then I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and pretty active that way. And then obviously people can always email me. I'm at matt@mattshaheen.com. So a bunch of different ways. I usually can get back to folks within 48 hours at the latest. But I'd love to, interact with any of the constituents out there that want to talk.
The state legislator, the state representative in Texas is really the state official that is the closest to you, that is the most knowledgeable about the issues that face you. And so, Matt and others are willing to talk and to listen. So, take advantage of it, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to say, Matt, that I saw the Dallas Morning News, tending to be liberal, actually endorsed you. They said your opponent is probably more along the lines of how they think, but that you have the requisite skills to be in the office, so they endorsed you.
Yeah, hopefully nobody will hold that against me. It's actually an unusual experience for me to be endorsed by the Dallas Morning News. So I think it's like maybe the second time out of the 8 years that I've been in office. I was a county commissioner for 5 years and state rep, so I think it was the first or second time they've ever even endorsed me.
Well, you're doing a great job, and those of us on the right think so too. Matt Shaheen, thanks for being with me. And next up, we're going to talk about generosity.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We are so glad you're with us. And I think if you've been listening to Point of View regularly in the past few days, you know that we've been on a mission to ask you to really help us. To keep Point of View broadcasting with your financial gifts and your prayers, certainly. And so I thought it would be appropriate today to talk a little bit about generosity and giving and just its value in the Christian life, the stewardship that we have as Christians. And so I brought someone in who is an expert on that, loves to teach people about it. And he's actually someone who's been very important in my life. In the past, he's been my pastor, and I've also traveled to the Holy Land a couple of times with him and his wife with groups, and he is David Roseberry, and you know, the book we're going to talk about is called Giving Up: How Giving to God Renews Hearts, Changes Minds, and Empowers Ministry, and you're going to love this because it gives very interesting and logical and biblical take on giving, which is a subject a lot of pastors stay away from, but not this one. But I just want to give a little bit, David, by way of bio, so people know you. David Roseberry started a church called Christ Church Plano. It was an Episcopal church 33 years ago. So for 31 years, he was the rector there. He and his wife, Fran, planted it, and it grew and grew. He also planted 6 daughter congregations out of that church, and then he stepped down. And now there's another rector there, and David Roseberry is got a new sort of challenge in his life. He's the director of a group called LeaderWorks. It's a nonprofit ministry. It exists to empower and energize the church and its leaders for today's missionary challenge. And a part of his task there is to sustain a culture of generosity, and this book is part of that. He's also the appointed provincial canon for mission for the Anglican Church in North America and the Dean of Churches for the Sake of Others. And David, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure, Penna.
It's fun to have you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I've been wanting to have you in for a while.
Yeah.
And so we finally made this happen. But can you just tell us, because a lot of people aren't familiar with the story of how the Anglican Church in America came about, and this overseeing body that you now work for, the Anglican Church in North America, just tell us a little bit about the development of that.
Well, as we know, around the culture, the whole culture has been changing, and things have been tilting to the left in so many ways and at so many levels. The church, the denominational church, has not been immune from this. And this same teaching, the same ideas came into the Episcopal Church back in the 40s and 50s and had their full flower in the 60s and 70s. And it just created enough tension that there were a group of us in the Episcopal Church that said, we can't do ministry here any longer. We can no longer make disciples of Jesus Christ on behalf of the Episcopal Church. We have to pull away and retain our Anglican heritage and the foundation that we all, love and treasure, the 500-year-old foundation and the 2,000-year-old tradition and heritage. But we've got to get away from this constant noise of the culture and the constant, drift to the left.
It was drifting away from biblical truth.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and one needs only look at what's happened since the middle of 2000 to where we are now to see that the Episcopal Church has continued to go that way. So there were about maybe 500 or 600 churches that left the Episcopal Church.
It was a big risk, wasn't it?
It was huge. It was a huge step out. Most people lost their buildings, their property. A lot of clergy, were pastors of churches, and all of a sudden now they're in startups, and they're in storefronts, and they're trying to start congregations without any kind of skill base at all. And thankfully at Christ Church, we made a shift. We were able, by God's grace, to keep our property, and we just moved from strength to strength. But my colleagues and I have some measure of compassion for this. But a lot of my colleagues really took it on the chin. It was a very difficult time. But since then, we've seen a lot of young leaders come into the Anglican Church in North America who love the Lord, love the Scriptures, and see the heritage of the Anglican faith is like the setting of a diamond. It's a perfect setting. It will show off the gospel beautifully when the gospel's believed. So that's the idea behind the Anglican Church in North America.
Well, I remember back when this all took place, and it was really newsworthy. It was in the news.
Oh yeah.
And you saw, like, for instance, the Falls Church back east.
Yeah.
That was a big, a big Episcopal church, and the Anglican, the people that left for biblical truth, ended up, I think, in a school. They lost this beautiful old church, which was then populated by very few people that remained that were on the liberal side. So it is a bold move, and I'm glad that God was gracious to Christ Church. And, so the church then went under the authority of an African church for a while, right?
Well, in a way, yes. You'd say that it went under the group of bishops that retain biblical truth. And you can't be an independent Anglican church. That's like an oxymoron.
Right.
You have to have some uplink that you think is, retaining the faith. And so our ACNA, Anglican Church in North America, connected to a larger group, primarily in Africa, but there were Orthodox Anglicans, they're called, all around the world that believe this, and we've come together in this fellowship of Anglicans.
Wow. So ACNA, you felt once you decided that it was maybe time for you to leave Christ Church after 31 years, that they needed perhaps the help of a pastor who'd been very successful in leading a body, in training up or providing encouragement and resources and help for other pastors. And that's kind of what you're doing, isn't it?
Exactly. I honestly felt that after 31 years, I was in the most privileged position I could ever have imagined for myself. I was in a wonderful church, incredible support, amazing people, and a great national footprint, if you will. And I thought, but I saw a lot of languishing going on around the province, the ACNA.
Yeah, because a lot of people didn't start with a big church.
No, they
started
didn't.
Small.
They started small, and there's a critical mass issue. There's all kinds of things that I could teach, and I had the benefit. I had the amazing benefit of 31 years of a very supportive congregation, an amazing education and inspiration from leaders all over the country about how to do some of these things. So I thought there's probably no one else that can just jump out of a church like this and go off and do some things that I ended up doing. And that's what leaderworks.org is.
And you can find that, ladies and gentlemen, by going to pointofview.net. We link to it, or just go to leaderworks.org to find out more. It is really fun to go there. There's a lot that I love to read that's just interesting and informative. But next up, we're going to talk about this book that David Roseberry has written, Giving Up. Because really, if pastors are listening or leaders, fostering a culture of generosity is so important. It kind of takes the pain out of it if you've already developed a generous people. We're going to talk about it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
These last few weeks have provided all of us with an education about memories, How well do we accurately recall events that took place decades ago? What have scientists discovered about true and false memories? We may never know how many of the memories that have been cited and even presented in the Senate Judiciary Committee are accurate, but we do have some data that suggests that the memories of people who testify in trials are often not as accurate as we might believe them to be. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus is a cognitive scientist and law professor who has studied the subject of memory for the last 4 decades. On my radio program, I cited one study of 300 people in this country who went to prison for crimes they did not commit. They were later exonerated by DNA evidence, and of those 300 who were imprisoned, 3/4 of the convictions were the result of false memories. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who has followed other stories in the news. You might remember the story of Jackie that appeared in the pages of Rolling Stone. She claimed that she was gang raped at a fraternity at the University of Virginia. The story was not true, and Rolling Stone had to apologize and remove the story. Dr. Loftus has found that it is even possible to implant false memories. Her research team, while guided by an ethics committee, was able to plant in participants all sorts of false memories. For example, being attacked by an animal or witnessing a demonic possession. Various other researchers have discovered the same problem with memories. They suggest that our brain pulls together pieces of memory and sometimes creates memories of events that never took place. This doesn't mean that we should never trust memories, but it does mean that if you're on a jury or if you're watching people recounting something from their past, you should be skeptical and look for corroborating evidence. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hey, this is John Stonestreet, the host of Breakpoint and the president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. As a champion of Christians thinking clearly about what's happening in the culture from a Christian worldview, there are a few people that I look to for more clarity and confidence and providing clear answers to the big questions that our culture is asking. And Kirby Anderson, I love what happens on Point of View each and every day. And anytime I get the opportunity to be a guest on the program, I always think that Kirby is the best interviewer in the business. I encourage you to support Point of View with your prayers and with your financial support.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Our thanks to John Stonestreet. He is a fun guest to have on the show, and he is aware, as we are, of the assaults that are facing our culture and really making it very important to continue this broadcast and to keep it strong. So we appreciate your gifts, and if you haven't helped us in this round of Truth Team 360, think about it and pray about it. We're going to talk about giving right now with David Roseberry. His book is Giving Up: How Giving to God Renews Hearts, Changes Minds, and Empowers Ministry. And David, I know that it's aimed at pastors, but it's also aimed at individuals, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the people in the pews have the resources. There's no question. What was amazing to me, and what was the genesis of this book, is that I read the New Testament letters of Paul, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, in a different way. And I saw into the heart of the New Testament church, and I saw this amazing generosity. When Paul speaks to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, he is actually referencing a special collection for people. Now he's in Corinth, okay?
Mm-hmm.
People that they will never know, that they will never meet, 1,500 miles away. And it just blew my mind that the Apostle Paul would be able to convince some people in Corinth, the decadent city of Corinth, who had been called out to be a church, that they had a responsibility for people that they couldn't see, that this money was not really for them. It was for themselves, but for the people in Jerusalem. That's the first thing that blew me away, that there was this heart of generosity. And you didn't ask for this, but it's kind of like a radio show, because you're putting things out there that you'll to touch people you will never, ever meet, except, in the life to come. But the other thing that blew me away is how Paul sort of matter-of-factly talks about giving to the Corinthians. In fact, he pits the giving of the Corinthians, which was kind of weak, with the strength of the Macedonian churches, which were up north of Corinth. And it's almost like he's got one against the other, which, of course, we would never do today. It's not at all polite to talk about, outgiving one another. But here's Paul trying to encourage one group by using as an example the generosity of another group. And once I got the idea that generosity might have been a cultural atmospheric condition in the early church, then I've just read the New Testament in a whole new way, and it all came to light. And that's what giving up is about.
So you think that you can help with the book and just with your organization to get pastors to create that? Because really, I think a lot of pastors hate trying to ask and have that time a couple times a year, or however many times that they encourage giving. They don't see that as a real exciting part of their ministry, but you are excited about it.
I really am, Penna, and it has to do with, being in a place for 31 years, in a North Dallas suburb. There are resources available, but, if you start to see them as idols, that these are actually going to grab your people and take them in the wrong direction, that if they don't solve that issue, okay, they have to solve one issue. Who is the Lord of their life? Okay, got that. I'm a Christian. And then what do I do with the things that he's given me? That's the second most important issue that people are going to face. Because if you don't answer that, the world has tons of answers on what you can do. And all you have to do is look over even the last 24 hours on what was in your wallet and where it went. And you've suddenly realized that you are in this tug of war between the values of the early church, values that Christ himself lived out, and the values of the world. And we so often, if we as pastors don't raise up that issue, what'll happen is we're not talking about idols. We're not talking about
it's an important
idolatry.
part of ministry.
Yes.
And, it's funny because when I came to faith, and it was in my senior year of college, after college I started working and had this career, and I moved in with some Christian girls. And one of them told me, you have to tithe. And I'm like, what is that? And she told me, and I was very disturbed. And what? 10%? And, over the span of my Christian life, it's become one of the joys of my life.
Right. And,
God has taught me so much about just being part of his kingdom in that way. And I think that's, that's important for believers to learn. It's something you have to learn.
It is something, and it was so tip of the tongue in the early church. The Apostle Paul quotes Jesus in a way that's never quoted in the Gospels. Remember what he said to the Ephesians. Remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. All right, so he's saying to the Christians in Ephesus, remember this? We've heard it. This is a famous saying of our Lord Jesus. Remember how he said. It's not carried in the Gospels, but it was an atmospheric condition in the early church. And out of that desire to give, they became well known. The early church became famous for giving, not for any other reason. And they gave, they ministered, widows, orphans, and beyond.
So we live in a different culture now.
Yeah.
And you talk about this sort of idea of a selfie theology. I mean, as the decades progress, we are more and more in that. Technology plays into it. So it's more difficult now, isn't it, to create that culture of giving, generosity?
Absolutely, because I think we've all seen it in the temptation is, of course, there every day, but with our kids and with all of life, it's the early fathers and the teachers of the church called it that you were curved in on yourself, that you were the most important person. And of course, that comes naturally because you're born and you're in the center of your own world. But when Christ comes, he changes that heart. And the next thing that has to change, or one of those next things, as you experienced in college, is your relationship with the resources. In fact, I believe it's only as generosity takes hold in a person's life that they can overcome the idol factory of the human heart.
So what about churches? They can turn in on themselves too, can't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the besetting sin. It happens all the time. And it always, that pastor always needs to remember, talk about the vision of reaching people, of helping people come to Christ. But the minute that a church turns in on itself, you know it.
And why do they do it? I mean, what makes them do it?
Because I think we tend to live in a consumeristic culture. We've got, a room full of consumers who are pointed in one direction at the pastor, and with, the subtext is thrill me.
Okay.
Make it fun, make it happy, make it entertainment. And the challenge of every pastor is to turn those hearts to the community.
So then the church just kind of gets in a spiral.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, every one of your listeners can cite a season, a church, a period of time, and even in their own lives. Okay, sometimes churches need a little bit more internal work, like a young married couple. For a season. But ultimately, that married couple or that family has got to turn out and say, what can we bring to the world?
Wow. Well, these are concepts that are, in a sense, counterintuitive, I think, especially in today's culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll talk a little bit more about, the decade, the atmosphere that we live in, the times that we live in, because it's not necessarily that people in the culture now think that they have to believe in anything except themselves.
Right.
So it makes that a lot easier. So, ladies and gentlemen, my guest again is David Roseberry. You can find out more about him by going to pointofview.net. You can see his picture there and his bio, and also more about LeaderWorks, his organization, and the book Giving Up. I recommend it. And as a matter of fact, you might want to give it to your pastor.
Yes, yeah, please do.
And you might want to read it yourself. It's actually a great read, and there's a lot of important information, so stay with us. We'll be back with more Point of View.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
And in studio with me is David Roseberry, and he, full disclosure, was my pastor for a few years. He stepped down from the church. He runs an organization called LeaderWorks. He helps pastors in the Anglican Communion to do what they do well, and a lot of that involves the discipleship of giving. And it even says on the back of this book, generosity is the new discipleship. And so giving is a big, important part of your Christian life. Mm-hmm. It's an important part of your role as a pastor, and you're very enthusiastic about it, and you're generating that enthusiasm among people in the Anglican Communion, aren't you?
Well, that's my goal. I think that generosity, I mean, we live in a culture now of, well, someone called it years ago, despisers. They just don't like the Christian faith. And frankly, we fumbled the ball at many levels in the local congregation, denomination. You know, the church has made, in a way, its message unbelievable, or at least inauthentic sometimes. And the culture sees this. They see the disparity between audio and video in congregations and denominations. But you can't fake generosity. When a church decides that it's going to be generous with its, from its members, and then the members get together and be generous in the community, that's authentic ministry. And that's really how the early church got a foothold in the culture. You think about how a band of, a couple of dozen people 200 or 300 years later would be a force to be reckoned with, and be everywhere in the Roman Empire. That just blows the mind in the ancient Roman world. And in many ways, and I point this out in the book, it was because they lived the message of giving as Jesus taught and as Paul demonstrated himself.
So how does that play out in modern times today in a church? Like, you can give an example from Christ Church or any other church that you've worked with.
Well, one of the things that was amazing, I'm thinking about this hurricane that's coming into Florida. God bless these people, and we'll pray for them. And I've got friends who are in the path. But it actually brought to mind Katrina. And what Katrina did is mobilize. I mean, it was a terrible event. Don't misunderstand me. But at Christ Church, it became a place that New Orleans became a place we embraced. I don't know how many mission trips we went on, 30 mission trips. People could not stay away. They loved to give. They loved to take things down. They loved to, minister, get down and muck out those houses and do everything they could. And the church that we worked with down there was at the center of it. And it became the renewing agent in the life of this community. That's a perfect example. The government's, moving trailers back and forth and things like that. But the church goes in and does their work person by person, pastor by pastor, people by people, and it creates a believability as a culture.
You can't argue with those results.
You cannot. That's why I also say that generosity is the new evangelism. People, because of the way truth operates in people's minds today, they say, okay, I see what you believe, but that's good. That's true for you. Okay. So the propositional truth is less persuasive in the culture today than it was, 100 years ago. But what is totally persuasive is somebody who is willing to get in and do some helping work.
When you talk about giving, because of the way we think today, we think in different ways. We're to differing degrees. We care about glorifying God in our lives rather than our own selfish values and things like that. So there are different generations that sort of respond to messages of asking for material things in different ways.
Oh, yes.
And you have this. I love this part of the book because it really was spot on to me that there are several generations, different generations. I mean, I looked at the millennials. It's hard to get them to give right now, but we better be nice to them because they're going to be...
They're going to be sitting on a lot of money here in a couple, 10, 20 years as this wealth passes from one generation to another.
Yeah.
This whole idea to me was almost an afterthought to the book. I started to...
No, it's in the end.
I know.
But I thought it was one of the most interesting
And as I look back
facts.
on it, Penna, I thought, this was really cool to do this little bit of research and realize that millennials are going to require a different approach from the church, from the pastor, than people from my generation or my parents' generation. Just because of they have this suspicion about institutions, millennials. They look around, they see everything falling apart, and they're kind of the show me people. I want to be informed. I want to be impressed with what you're doing. I want to be involved. That's the key word. How do you reach them? You got to involve them. But other generations, the Gen X or the Boomers or the greatest generation.
So are the Boomers the most generous right now?
They are. They certainly are, because they have the resources, and they're in that stage where they're keeping the institutions afloat that their parents began. The greatest generation. But a pastor who wants to reach his community, his church, with this message of generosity and the ministry of the church is going to have all four different messages going at the same time. It's not easy, but you've got to involve the millennials. One group you're going to have to inform. You're going to have to inspire.
What about the Gen Xers? What are they like? Are they fairly generous? Are they becoming more generous?
I don't know the specifics because this really would need a lot more research. We'd have to do some, some studies and things like that. But my experience is that the Boomers are generous. But the oldest group out there, this greatest generation and those right after, they are often lonely. And what a pastor can do, and it makes a huge difference, is just connect to them. Invite them to be part of it. Go visit them. I have loved, over my years in ministry, the pastoral visitation of getting into people's homes, talking about their lives, and then asking them one-on-one to support the ministry of the church. And while most pastors are very uncomfortable doing that, they think it's going to be offensive or something, honestly, in 31 years of ministry, I have never, ever been turned away or pushed away. Some people say no, they can't do it, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Oh, well, again, I think that if you're a part of something like a church and you're benefiting from it and you're giving to it of your time and, just your heart, then, your money just, in a sense, it's a natural and it just takes someone to ask you.
Absolutely. And if as Jesus said, wherever your treasure is, there's your heart. And so he's kind of saying, if you want your heart to be in the right place, put your treasure in the right place and your heart will follow. We always love what we give to, always. We wouldn't give to it otherwise.
So another part of this is, we tend to naturally be to covet material goods. We all do. We all there's things that we like that we'll spend money on, and so sometimes it becomes a sin or a stronghold in our lives. But the opposite, in a sense, there's an opposite to that vice would be the virtue of generosity, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The 10th commandment, the commandment against greed or covetousness, is something that is impossible for the human heart or mind to overcome. It is always there because it's a thought. It's just something that wells up within us. That greed is natural, it's survivalistic, however you'd want to say it. But generosity is the only thing that I can tell in the New Testament, the history of the church. Generosity is the only thing that can actually put that fire out. And I think you and I both, in our age and, tithing for so long, we recognize how much of our wanter, that little voice inside of us that,
wants things,
how much that has been muted with the idea that I can actually give this away. And I have a great sense of feeling about being generous. I can really release this. And I have other stories to tell me, talk about it the other side of the break, but I just know in my heart as a younger man, I wanted a lot. I wanted a lot of things. And even though I was a pastor, it was a constant source of frustration. And then my wife and I began to give, and we began to believe what the Bible said. And time, age, wisdom, and a changed heart. I don't have those desires anymore. I'm not the best consumer anymore.
Well, that's a good thing. Yes, I think it's part of our development, and God works in us, and it's wonderful to see the Spirit doing that.
Well, I need to correct that. With the exception of technology, then I really love that.
Okay. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We've got more to talk about. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The U.S. Department of Justice recently announced that it will update the U.S. Attorney's Manual, creating a new section giving special attention to religious liberty. Updates to such a manual are sometimes viewed as routine, but they tend to reflect the values and priorities of the Department of Justice and function as a sort of roadmap for the department's coming years. The updates announced in the new manual requires the nation's U.S. attorneys to not only identify a dedicated point of contact on litigation having to do with religious liberty, but also requires coordination of any such litigation directly with the central office in Washington, D.C. In other words, Attorney General Sessions is announcing that his office will be very hands-on in lawsuits involving our first freedom. When the Department of Justice announced the updated U.S. Attorney's Manual, then Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand explained, quote, "Religious liberty is an inalienable right protected by the Constitution, and defending it is one of the most important things we do at the Department of Justice." Clearly, the days of abandoning protections in the law for religious liberty, including bipartisan laws like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, may be a thing of the past. The critical leadership of the Attorney General and his staff to protect religious liberty for all Americans will do much to strengthen all of our core freedoms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
I just want to encourage all those of you who say you're Christians, help keep Point of View on the air. We cannot afford to allow these stations to go empty. We need good Christian input because evil is taking over. Please support Point of View.
I just wanted to let y'all know that I greatly thank God for Point of View Ministries. I'm one of those, few but very proud conservative millennials, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now. And after listening to the show over the years, I've realized that I'm supposed to be for truth. I'm supposed to be a Christian and then a conservative, and I'm supposed to look at all this that's going on around us in today's culture through a biblical lens. And I can't thank y'all enough for that.
Point of View. Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
We are well aware at Point of View that what we do, we must do with excellence and attention to the sweeping changes that are taking place in our culture. We try to pay attention to them. We try to help our listeners deal with them. And we do ask in return that you would support us. And so our number is 800-347-5151. Unless you want to go to our website, pointofview.net, you can give easily there. There's a donate button in the right-hand corner. But if you want to call, that's the number. The announcer will give it during the next break. We are talking about giving and generosity. And David Roseberry is with me. He's written the book on it. He helps pastors to create a climate of generosity. And, you know, I think that one of the other forces that we have to contend with when it comes to generosity toward God's work is the culture, what I was just discussing. Christianity is one of several options for people now. Back in the early church, which you discussed before, everybody believed in a God. They didn't consider themselves to be the provider of their own life or livelihood, but we are very independent and self-sufficient today, aren't we?
Well, that's true, but I have to quickly add that there were so many different permutations and mutations of what you just said about believing in God that the mystery religions around the early church were, they were everywhere. And what came to be the message that Paul preached, especially to the Corinthians, was the unique work of Jesus Christ on the cross. And that was the anchor that changed everything, not only in his life, in the lives of the Corinthians and the church, and through that church, other places. And as I mentioned earlier, in the hour when they gave this amazing gift of generosity to the Judeans in Jerusalem.
So many people in the culture today, those that don't know Christ, that don't maybe really have a faith in any type of God, they can get away with that now today because they have ways of surviving. It's not just a matter of survival now. And, they can become, in a sense, self-sufficient until something happens, like Katrina or whatever, or a health issue. And so we, as a church, now we have that extra challenge, I think, in reaching them, don't we?
It is a huge challenge, and I'm a victim of it myself. You have the heart that you have for the church and the message of the gospel, and then you go back out into the world. You stop at the mall and you say, "Wow, I could have all this too." And I was.
And that still bothers you?
Well, yes, absolutely. Especially as I mentioned earlier on about technology. And I just wanted to relate a very brief anecdote. Since my wife and I left the active ministry in a parish, we still tithe to an account and a bank account. And then out of that account, we give. So we don't give every week, but we do have resources that we want to give wherever we go. And it had been a couple weeks. So my wife and I had a check of about $800 we wanted to give to a church that we visited that week, which in our world, for us, that's a lot of money, $800. And we gave it freely, lovingly, and then we drove home. And on the way home...
So you put it in that account?
Well, I took it out of the account and put it in the plate of the church I attended there. And then on the way home, I stopped at, can I say it? Mm-hmm. Best Buy, and walked in, and I saw big, huge, flat-screen televisions for $800. And I thought, whoa, maybe I could have that instead. And that, it sort of crystallized the moment that every believer has to imagine themselves in. Every child that is being raised in the church is going to have to sort through what is real in gospel terms and what is almost a mirage. And as it turns out, the flat screen television and the hope and the glitz and the glamour that it promises is a mirage. What's really real is the love of Christ and the impact that has on a human family. And that's worth supporting. Every millennial, every boomer is going to have that same tug of war in whatever environment they're in.
Yeah, and I think as you grow in your Christian life, and this giving and this generosity piece is part of the discipleship of the believer, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it is incumbent upon the church to convey this message, very simple message. Paul was so upfront about it. 1 Corinthians 16, set aside the money that you've been in keeping with your income. I mean, come on, it's a when are pastors actually that forceful with their own members? But it's not just the pastor to the people. It's the parents to the children. And it's then the parents and children to the community. A church that is generous in its tithes and offerings is a powerhouse in a community. It can accomplish it. To me, it is like Archimedes' principle. It creates enormous leverage to change a community because you can deploy resources, deploy people, deploy hope. But so many churches are struggling, with this Sunday's offering.
Yeah. So sometimes I see the philosophy of materialism creep into Christianity, even in the teaching of some churches, where there's sort of a promise that if you give, God will take care of you. I mean, that's a very explicit message given. Or, the more you give, the more you will receive. Put in, very blatant terms, and it becomes, in some places, it's very overt, and people are challenged to give and then just wait for the miracle. Others, it's less, it's a little bit more subtle, but it really has crept into the church. I mean, I call it a prosperity gospel, even when it's in its subtlest form. It sort of is, isn't it?
It is, and it's only in the 20th century that you could say all of this has been turned in on what can I get out of God? What can I give so I can get more? But the New Testament is so clear about this. Whatever you give, it's not what I receive. It is what is received. All gifts they're like seed. They all sprout, but they don't all sprout for me. They don't come back as
it's
bread.
Because people just look at themselves.
Right,
it's the selfie theology.
And and I have to say, having said that, there is a lot of blessings that come as people give. But I say in the book that I believe in the prosperity gospel. It's the gospel that prospers when people give.
Wow. Well, thank you for the message and the encouragement today. And I hope people, ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this book. You can check it out at pointofview.net and see if you might want to get a hold of it. There's ways to do that. Thank you, Father David Roseberry, for coming in today on this rainy day and chatting with me. I've really enjoyed it.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Penna.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up, we are going to talk about these elections. What did the Kavanaugh, sort of the activities of the last couple of weeks, do to the Democrats? What did it do to the Republicans? What did it do to excitement? We'll talk about it after this.
Of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor. True story. He goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer. Stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife Jenny was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. We've said many times in talking about the upcoming election that the normal way that things happen with regard to midterms is that the president's party loses 26 seats in the House. And so the question is, are we on track for that to happen? Is it going to be worse? Or is it going to be actually perhaps a different kind of midterm election? Well, my next guest he knows what he would like to happen. He wants to see conservatives and people that hold to strong biblical values elected in droves across the country. His name is John Graves, Esquire, president of Vision America, which is an organization that was founded by Dr. Rick Scarborough, and it mobilizes and encourages pastors and Christians across the country to be the voices of truth to our nation. And one of the things that happens is there's a lot of encouragement of pastors to get involved. There are voter guides and lots of different other ways that this organization has worked for years to get Christians involved. And John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Penny.
Well, I'm glad that you're with me, and I know that we're looking at the elections coming up, and you can look at it with national polls that show us one thing, and then, of course, you have to remember that every locality and state has its own election there, so that's really what we're looking at, isn't it?
That's exactly right, and if you'll remember, the election 2 years ago, the polls weren't exactly accurate, and so a lot of it, depends on turnout in an off-year election, and the far left has been extremely energized and mobilized, and that really didn't equalize until the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. That really kind of woke up both sides, but the far left was already energized. Social conservatives and Christians and people of faith are now paying more attention, and hopefully that will last for the next 27 days.
Yeah, how do you keep that enthusiasm alive?
Yeah, that's the challenge. Hopefully, there's just been such a overreach that people will see this is what matters. Elections have consequences, and government belongs to those who show up. And so that's my passion, is to try to get Christians to be the ones who show up and elect who governs them. Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous rule, people can rejoice. And you can't really have awakening or revival until, when you live in a constitutional republic, until we get our people to be salt and to be light and to stop being walked on, but to influence in a godly way who's governing us in this country. So that's what we traveled across the country trying to encourage pastors and people of faith to do.
So I understand that you were recently with pastors in Houston, even today. What did you tell them?
Yes, I was in front of a couple hundred pastors, and I just showed them the story and the statistics that we know spiritually that when a pastor leads, people will be salt and light and change the community, elections, legislation, the culture, etc. And we measure empirically. We're the first group to ever do this. Churches often share their church membership list with us. They sign a privacy policy. It's free. And then we're able to show them empirical proof that when a pastor leads, that's what changes the culture. Well, most people don't realize in this election cycle, For example, just in the state of Texas, 10% of the people voted in the primary, including the Democrat and the Republican primary both. So that means 90% of the people are not showing up to pick who the candidates are. We'll vote in the next 27 days, and 76% of the people will not vote in this election. That's kind of based on the last off-year midterm election. And so if we can get Christians to be the ones who actually begin to change that, we can make an exponential impact by doing that.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you vote in this election, you have an outsized impact.
Exactly.
To a great degree. And so you're the one that's helping to put these people in office to a much greater degree than you were 2 years ago when everybody was voting. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, there'll be probably 55% vote in a presidential election and about 24% vote in an off-year non-presidential election. So it's a big impact. And most Christians, the number one complaint we hear is, it's messy. Politics is messy. I'm tired of holding my nose and voting between the lesser two evils. Well, none of these candidates are running for pastor. None of them are Jesus. He's not on the ballot. But we if we can get engaged in the primary, we can get better candidates. If we begin to wake up and vote in the general, we at least pick the better of the two options we're presented with, even if they're imperfect.
Right. Let me ask you a question about pastors, because sometimes they are reluctant to get involved in politics, and I know you must have ways that you persuade them because Vision America has so many pastors that are involved. But also they're busy. They're just busy. So how do you advise them to handle this extra responsibility?
We do the work for them. So for pastors, all we ask is their permission. And so until a pastor gives us permission, we don't usually work in the church. We don't do it where we go into the church and get the people to do something. We only work through the ordained shepherd that God has over that church, whoever the pastor is. And so once they do it, they can just delegate to a volunteer, a staff member, somebody in their church, and then we do the work for them to train how registration works best. And then we measure it. Well, it's hard. You just nailed it. Pastors are busy, but they also are working in a culture that has a lot of challenges. And so, but they see the problem, the religious liberty persecution that's just gotten out of control. And so we do it across racial lines, across denominational lines, and we've had really, really good success. What's hard is to get them to pay attention. We have a pastor's event this Thursday in Dallas at the Bent Tree Country Club from 11 to 1, and it'll be pastors from all over the Metroplex in Dallas. And it's hard to get them to come, but once they come and see the facts and the empirical evidence that we do, they actually get really excited, and they make a massive impact. Once you show a pastor good information on his church, if he's a true shepherd, right? There are shepherds for hire. There are false, prophets out there. We don't try to work with those churches. We try to distinguish between the two. But if it's a biblical pastor, I've not met one worth his salt that doesn't try to lead his church when he finds out half of them aren't even registered, and half of the ones that are registered aren't going to vote this November. Most pastors don't believe it until we show them the actual data. It's public information. Right. You can go to the county and get it. It's just cumbersome and complicated. So we do all the hard, boring, cumbersome, costly stuff and complicated stuff, and then we just make it simple and give it to the pastors for free.
Can you hold over and stay with me for a few more minutes after the break?
You bet.
Got a couple minutes. Great. I want to ask John Graves about some of the areas of the country that are key that we need to be looking at right now. We know that the United States Senate may have been greatly affected by the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation process, but we've got some battlegrounds. We'll talk about it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
These last few weeks have provided all of us with an education about memories. How well do we accurately recall events that took place decades ago? What have scientists discovered about true and false memories? We may never know how many of the memories that have been cited and even presented in the Senate Judiciary Committee are accurate, but we do have some data that suggests that the memories of people who testify in trials are often not as accurate as we might believe them to be. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus is a cognitive scientist and law professor who has studied the subject of memory for the last 4 decades. On my radio program, I cited one study of 300 people in this country who went to prison for crimes they did not commit. They were later exonerated by DNA evidence, and of those 300 who were imprisoned, 3/4 of the convictions were the result of false memories. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who has followed other stories in the news. You might remember the story of Jackie that appeared in the pages of Rolling Stone. She claimed that she was gang raped at a fraternity at the University of Virginia. The story was not true, and Rolling Stone had to apologize and remove the story. Dr. Loftus has found that it is even possible to implant false memories. A research team, while guided by an ethics committee, was able to plant in participants all sorts of false memories. For example, being attacked by an animal or witnessing a demonic possession. Various other researchers have discovered the same problem with memories. They suggest that our brain pulls together pieces of memory and sometimes creates memories of events that never took place. This doesn't mean that we should never trust memories, but it does mean that if you're on a jury or if you're watching people recounting something from their past, you should be skeptical and look for corroborating evidence. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hey, this is John Stonestreet, the host of Breakpoint and the president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. As a champion of Christians thinking clearly about what's happening in the culture from a Christian worldview, there are a few people that I look to for more clarity and confidence and providing clear answers to the big questions that our culture is asking. And Kirby Anderson, I love what happens on Point of View each and every day. And anytime I get the opportunity to be a guest on the program, I always think that Kirby is the best interviewer in the business. I encourage you to support Point of View with your prayers and with your financial support.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. On the phone with me is John Graves, and he's president of Vision America, focused like a laser right now on the upcoming elections. And John, do you go in and speak to the members at the churches and bring in candidate forums and things like that? Or are you mainly on the outside teaching the church how to do this kind of thing?
We do both. We reach pastors and people of faith. So we normally are mobilizing pastors because each pastor is what I call a force multiplier. They represent, for example, in Texas, 350 people each. Okay, and that's who people trust. They're there and they are in front of them every single week. But we also reach Christians. So, for example, you referenced our voter guide earlier. We have the ability to micro-target our voter guide straight in these swing states to the people who are Christian, who are social conservatives, who are people of faith that may or may not vote all the time, and try to encourage them to vote.
Do you consider the abortion issue to be one of your big barometers?
Yes, that's to me the slavery issue of our time.
Yeah. So what are the battlegrounds? I mean, we all look at states like Missouri right now. We're looking at Montana and other states. So what are the key states right now that Vision America's like looking at the polls and really watching closely?
Yeah, there's 15 Senate races that could go one way or the other, literally, that are within the margin of error. That we could, on the more conservative side, where the Republicans hold, Tennessee, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, could be lost. But then there's also 5 states that Trump won 18-42: Montana, North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, and West Virginia. 4 of those voted against Brett Kavanaugh. West Virginia once, and only after it was clear that without any Democrat support, the Republicans voted Brett Kavanaugh in. The West Virginia senator said, okay, well, I'll vote for him then. But then there's states you wouldn't think of that are within, New Jersey's within the margin of error now, not Minnesota, Wisconsin. Ohio is pretty close, but it's going to be a long shot. And then, Pennsylvania and Michigan are kind of tier 2. They're possible, but they lean pretty heavily Democratic at the current moment.
So Republicans tend to, actually Democrats tend to spend more money on door-to-door retail politics than Republicans. Is that turning out to be the case now, or do you know?
Yes, the Democrats are extremely energized, and they have been, even in Texas, out working the conservatives and the Republican Party. If you just look at the signs and the door knocking and the text message and all, but the misnomer is that it acts like and looks like grassroots, but we're finding out more and more and more it's really paid for by a lot of billionaires. There's a lot of this evidence coming forward that some of those quote-unquote volunteers and grassroots activists and protesters are really just paid to do a job. And that includes Texas. They've had paid volunteers, if you will, or grassroots door walkers for about 8 months now.
For O'Rourke?
Yes.
You think? Okay. Because, that's the state we're both sitting in, and it's just such a shock that there's a close race here.
Yeah, they put $10 million in the race and sent a bunch of people at the first of the year, and so they literally were texting. I'd be shocked if you haven't gotten, one. I've gotten 15 to 20 different text messages from them. And, they'll have a yard sign in your yard within 24 to 48 hours just by pushing that. And so they.
And then the people watch the debate and they realize they don't agree with them.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, if the word gets out, if the message gets out, and the irony of, what came out with Brett Kavanaugh and what, half the country was arguing disqualifies him, it was something, 36 years ago that there was no corroborating proof of. With Beto, you literally have him being arrested for theft, arrested for a DWI, and trying to flee the scene. And, there's no dispute about that. He doesn't even try to say it didn't happen, but no one's talking about it.
Talk a little bit about your voter guides, John, because I know that some churches are more receptive than others to voter guides. My opinion is voter guides are just about the best way because they are nonpartisan. Yeah,
actually, 75% of the people in the last election, George Barnett did a study. The number one thing 75% of the people relied on was a nonpartisan voter guide. And the reason is simple. They don't trust the media. People don't trust the media. They don't trust the PACs. They don't trust the parties. They don't know who to trust. They trust their pastor and they trust their friends. So when we give the evidence, and it's not a hit piece, it's not negative, it's just the facts. Here, in the last election, Hillary Clinton in the last debate, if you'll remember, said if you're traditional family or pro-life, I'm not your candidate. Well, that's just the facts. She's not trying to appeal. And it was shocking to me because she didn't just say homosexual marriage is okay. She said, I'm not your candidate if you want traditional marriage, which means a man and a woman. And so we just give the facts. But it's church approved. It's a simple one piece of paper. A lot of churches hand it out. But for pastors who don't, we also micro-target and get these directly to Christians in each of these states. Last election cycle, for example, I was in front of over 5,000 pastors in 15 swing states, and we micro-targeted 5 million voter guides, either handing them out in churches or micro-targeting to social media, home Wi-Fi addresses, text messages, those kind of things. And that's really helpful because people can then forward it to their friends.
Mm-hmm.
It's hyperlinked. They click on the footnote, and they can see the actual story or news coverage or debate or where the candidate said it. And we cover, usually 10, 12, 15 issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, give us a call if you'd like to. I'd love to know, are you going to vote in the next election? How important is it to you to get involved? 800-351-1212. John Graves of Vision America wants to help you involve others. And so, John, can you tell us how, where should people go to get information for their particular area and to pass things on, as you've just mentioned?
Okay, so if it's our website is visionamerica.org, and so there's kind of two tracks that we serve. If it's a pastor in the Dallas area, they can just go to the events tab, and we have a luncheon this Thursday, and they can find out more about it, and we'll try to tell them. Or they can go to our website if they want a voter guide, and you can click on your state, and then we'll link you out to the voter guides before early voting. So most states, that's in 2 weeks, October 22nd, and we'll have those out. You can also email us at info@visionamerica.org, and we will make sure you get a voter guide.
Are you going to be having pastors' meetings in other states? Because we're in about 300 stations across the country.
We are. I was just in Montana. The states I mentioned earlier, Florida, Arizona, Montana, Missouri is a huge state for us, Tennessee. We're going to have voter guides for each one of these states. We've been in multiple of these states doing pastor events, and we won't do a ton more pastor events in the next 27 days in all these different states. We'll do a handful, but we will. Our focus this last month, because early voting has started in some places and is about to ramp up in others. And in most states, Texas, Florida, for example, 70% of people vote early.
Wow.
And so that happens, the 2 weeks before the election. Everybody thinks about the election day being the conclusion, but there's only 30% of people left once you get to that day.
Well, we've got some calls, and I'm going to wait till after the break to take them. But, John, I want to thank you for being with me. I really wanted to just get this information to folks listening so that they can make use of your resources. We really thank you for joining us today, but also thank you for what you're doing, because it's so valuable, and it's really a stewardship for the body of Christ to be involved to make a difference in this way, isn't it?
It is. It really is. It's a stewardship of your citizenship. We're dual citizens of heaven and of this world, and Jesus calls on us to bring the kingdom of heaven on the earth in the model prayer. And so that's part of our passion is the church is being walked on. Christians are being walked on, and Jesus says that'll happen if you lose your flavor, if you lose your salt. You're not good, but to be walked on under the feet of men. And so we're trying to get the church to take the bushel basket off, be the light. Anywhere darkness dominates, the light is the answer. When the church withdraws from media, from education, from movies, from Hollywood, from government, then the darkness comes in.
Amen. Thank you for that message. We'll be back.
Former U.S. Representative and Army Lieutenant Colonel Alan West.
What really does upset me, our ministries, our voices has to struggle to get their message out. And then we ask ourselves, why are we getting beat so much in the media sphere? This is what we're up against, folks. We don't support our own causes, but they have millions upon billions of dollars to do it. And if you want to keep your freedom, if you want to pass on with the greatness of the United States of America to your children or grandchildren, $1 a day? Come on now. We could do that. Kirby Anderson can't call George Soros. The other side can, and the other side does. We want to win this thing? Let's help support this ministry.
Imagine Paul Revere decided he was too tired on that night in 1775 if he'd sat home thinking someone else could do the job. Don't delay. Accept Colonel West's challenge. Do what you can as a beacon of truth. Now is the time. Write into pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
The lines are open. Our number is 800-351-1212. We would love to hear from you. We're just going to talk in this last half hour about the election. And, do you think it's important to be involved in this election? Do you think the Kavanaugh hearings helped Republicans, helped Democrats, generated enthusiasm on both sides? John Graves said the enthusiasm was already so high on the Democrats, it probably helped the Republicans more. And here's a piece that says there has been a major shift in midterm election polling, showing the GOP is on the rise in several key races in battleground states across the country. This comes from CNN political analyst Harry Enton. He says, I think a poll bounces there. And we're not just seeing it in the private polls. It does seem to be in the public polls as well. And Republicans do, in fact, seem to be seeing some sort of bounce. Now, this was before the vote on Kavanaugh, so this was ongoing. And there was just some consternation about how he was treated and anger about the Democrats. And so Republicans are starting to get engaged and involved. And so if you have a comment on that, we'd love to hear from you. Do you think that what happened to Justice Kavanaugh, he started work today, it helps one party or the other? Do you think that some Democrats are turned off by their own party, perhaps, in the way the senators acted? All that's on the table. 800-351-1212. This article says the North Dakota Senate race is slipping away from Democrats as Representative Kevin Cramer holds a double-digit lead over Democrat Senator Heidi Heitkamp. I was a little surprised that she voted against Kavanaugh, and that she would not support him because of this, because she is losing ground there, and it's such a conservative state. So this particular article, and I'll see the spokesperson is Mr. Enton. Let's see, he's from CNN, Harry Enton. He says, this is to me the biggest number of the week. We saw an earlier poll in North Dakota that showed something similar. If Democrats want to take back the United States Senate, they need to hold North Dakota. Very, very, very bad news for Democrats. He also commented on Democrat incumbent in Missouri, Claire McCaskill. Again, she is only polling at 43%. She's tied with her GOP challenger, and even in some polls, he's winning. He's the attorney general and a very, very conservative guy. And Claire McCaskill may be fighting for her life there in the state of Missouri. And then Enton closed with a Tennessee Senate race, which showed Republican incumbent. Well, she's not an incumbent. That's wrong. She's a member of Congress. She's running for the Senate seat against former Governor Phil Bredesen, Democrat. And this is a state Donald Trump won by 26 percentage points. So voters are going to vote for how they feel about the president, probably, and part of it. I think that Marsha Blackburn's just a really bold and winsome female. She fights for the sanctity of human life. Should be a popular issue there in Tennessee. It's very conservative. So we'll see. But it's just an encouragement to believers to get involved. Let's take some calls. We've got Carrie in South Carolina. Hi, Carrie. Thanks for calling in.
What you do every day. My comment is this, that the Democrats have historically, they've come against the Second Amendment. They're very vocal about that. That leftists that dominate schools now are teaching our children how to come against freedom of speech. They're more and more outraged with speech that doesn't agree with them. And now Kavanaugh has pointed out that the Democrats and leftists are now ready to dispense with the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And those three things are deeply foundational to our culture and Western civilization. And I think Americans are finally waking up to the fact that we don't want to go where this train is headed, and it's time to correct. So yeah, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm on the conservative side.
Yeah, and you as you pointed out, the whole idea of the assumption of innocence of the accused, of due process, that we just assume is reigns supreme here in this country, was questioned under this Kavanaugh battle over his confirmation. And so, I mean, some people that are realizing they can't take things for granted that they once did.
Absolutely. I always say about the 1960s that they had all the right questions and all the wrong answers. And also that since the contract with America, I think Republicans have been struggling. They haven't understood how to lead. And under Trump, they're finding their backbone and their message, and none too late either, thank God.
Yeah, it's very interesting in one sense that you had somebody who wasn't really considered a conservative over all these years. He was a Democrat even at one time. He's been the most effective president we've ever had to advance conservative causes, and especially the Supreme Court, to get the court back to what a court is supposed to be.
Yeah, well, you can't, with leftists, you can't ever appease. That's the other thing we learned with Kavanaugh. The more they try to appease the Democrats, the more the Democrats pushed. And I think they're learning now, finally, that you need to defeat. You don't appease.
Yeah, amen. Listen, thank you so much, Carrie, for calling in. Did you find it interesting, the announcement by Nikki Haley today?
Oh, we love our Nikki Haley. I've been so proud of her. And yes, I found it very interesting. So we'll see. We'll see. She's been so effective.
Yes.
But I know it's been hard.
Yeah. So you may see her floating around with her family in South Carolina, or maybe she's going to go on to bigger and better things, and we'll see her back in government somewhere someday.
She surely is a strong Christian and a strong conservative. As we're having, let me just throw this in, as we're having another hurricane head our way, I'll always remember that when Matthew came, Nikki Haley led us in a prayer before before it was lights out. She led, and it wasn't even a question. She was like, okay, and now we'll pray. And I'm so grateful for her leadership. She's been wonderful.
Yeah, she's been it's too bad. But the people who are sometimes the best leaders, they don't see government as their whole life. The left often does. Well, thank you for your call, Carrie. We appreciate it.
Thank you. God bless.
Let's go now to Arizona and speak with Evan. Hi, Evan. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, Miss Penna. How are you doing today?
I'm great.
I just wanted to call and let everybody know this first time since Ross Perot ran for president that I saw something in a president. I went out and I voted. 48 years old. And I think us like-minded men and Christian women need to get out there and, like how they said back in the 80s, we need to rock the vote. We need to make our voices heard, or we have a society like we have today. And I just feel it's really going down the commode quick.
Yeah.
So if we don't get up there and make our...
We face great headwinds as conservatives and Christians, don't we?
Yeah.
Well,
I just wanted
what are you going to do to influence people to vote?
I'm just going to ask them if they like how things are going. You know, if you're good with how things are, then do what you've been doing. You know, me personally, I'm not good with the way things are, so I'm going to get out and vote in my local election, on the state election. You know, for the longest time, Miss Penna, I thought that my single vote didn't count. But then I start thinking about, you know, hearing folks who had voted and feeling the remorse that I didn't take the time to do my civic duty.
Yeah.
And we as Americans, we're kind of obligated to do that, or we get to just sit in the mess. You know, and me, for one, I don't want to sit in the mess. I'm ready to move on.
I think one thing to do is to make the point of the good things that have been done, too, because, you know, you've got people running who are saying they're going to impeach the president. They're going to impeach Justice Kavanaugh. They're going to roll back the tax cuts. They're going to bring back the regulations. So the good things that have happened, the progress that's been made, is at risk. So that's another talking point for you.
It is. The thing that bothers me is if we just sit back and be complacent, nothing's going to change.
Yeah,
we've made really good headway. I would love to live in a country where you can no longer have an abortion, to where, things of those natures, we can just do away with that. And hopefully with the Honorable Kavanaugh on the bench, hopefully some of those things will come around for us.
Yeah, if we overturn Roe versus Wade, it will go back to the states. It probably won't wipe out abortion, but it will sure make it more rare. We are taking your calls, 800-351-1212. We'll be back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The U.S. Department of Justice recently announced that it will update the U.S. Attorney's Manual, creating a new section giving special attention to religious liberty. Updates to such a manual are sometimes viewed as routine, but they tend to reflect the values and priorities of the Department of Justice and function as a sort of roadmap for the department's coming years. The updates announced in the new manual requires the nation's U.S. attorneys to not only identify a dedicated point of contact on litigation having to do with religious liberty, but also requires coordination of any such litigation directly with the central office in Washington, D.C. In other words, Attorney General Sessions is announcing that his office will be very hands-on in lawsuits involving our first freedom. When the Department of Justice announced the updated U.S. Attorney's Manual, then Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand explained, quote, "Religious liberty is an inalienable right protected by the Constitution, and defending it is one of the most important things we do at the Department of Justice." Clearly, the days of abandoning protections in the law for religious liberty, including bipartisan laws like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, may be a thing of the past. The critical leadership of the Attorney General and his staff to protect religious liberty for all Americans will do much to strengthen all of our core freedoms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Well, I'd give you multiple reasons to get to Point of View. Number one, let's just talk about radio in general. Radio is the only medium that you can actually do something and listen to at the same time. That's not true with other medias. So you can actually work or do whatever you're doing around your house and yet still hear what you need to hear on radio. So I advocate radio as a great medium for getting the gospel and other things, other information out to Christians and hopefully new Christians alike. If we don't support them, I'm not convinced those messages will get out in the future.
Thank you for your program. I am a team member
and you have opened my eyes to the truth.
Point of View. Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
You can be part of Truth Team 360 and just go to the website, pointofview.net. And we would love to welcome you into Truth Team 360. If you're already part of it, you can think about perhaps increasing your giving. We appreciate it, and it helps us to stay strong. Well, I've put a couple of articles up at the website that I wanted to point your attention to before we go back to your calls. And if you're waiting on the line, we'll take that call. As many as we can before the end of the show. One of them is by Andrew McCarthy, and it's trying to impeach Kavanaugh will only raise questions about Ford. So we've mentioned the idea of impeachment. It's been brought up by Gerald Nadler, who is the head of the House, or actually the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, and he would be the chairman if the Democrats take over. And he says he's going to impeach Kavanaugh, but they really don't have, as according to McCarthy, a realistic chance of removing Kavanaugh from the bench. As a matter of fact, pursuing impeachment would revive questions about Christine Blasey Ford and her story. And so would they really want to do that? Would they really want to call attention to what has been seen as just nasty tactics that on the part of senators? I don't know. I don't know what their calculation would be, but that was an interesting piece I thought you might want to take a peek at pointofview.net. And I have another one earlier in the show we were talking about privacy and bathroom bills and the idea that in some states, actually the Obama administration told all schools they had to open their restrooms and locker rooms up to people who identified as a certain gender. So whatever gender they identified as, they could go into that locker room. So it devastates privacy. President Trump reversed that, but some schools are still hanging on to that policy. And there was a situation in, let's see, what state was this in? Georgia. And a 5-year-old girl just left class, asked the teacher if she could go to the restroom. And she went, and then after her came, someone else was in there when she came out of the stall there, and it was a gender fluid little boy. Thinks he's a girl, I guess, but he doesn't really think he's a girl because he actually, even though he's only 5, he assaulted her sexually. And the mom complained, and the school is not changing the policy, not punishing the boy. And now the U.S. Department of Education is assessing whether the school's transgender bathroom policy contributed to this sexual assault. So it just shows how dangerous these policies are, and how, where they still exist across the country, especially in schools with our children, they need to be stopped. But you've got people who agreed with this, and they are not, even though the president and the White House issued the letter reversing the policy, it's not reversed everywhere. So that's an interesting topic. We'll have more on that, but I just wanted to put that up on the website so you could take a peek at it. So go to pointofview.net. That's where all the articles and bios of our guests and all the materials relating to the people we've interviewed today. Let's go now back to the phones and speak with Rick in the state of Florida. Hi, Rick. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my call. I appreciate everything that y'all are doing there. And one of the things that I want to mention is what we did in 2016 is we prayed for our elections, and we need to continue to do that as the, citizens of the United States, continue in prayer. But
Absolutely.
One of the things that in 1970, when I graduated from high school in the 70s, I was registered as a Democrat, and it wasn't long it became evident to me that I was voting more and more for the Republican candidates in the state and national elections. So I went to my good friend, a 97-year-old World War II veteran, and asked him what happened. Did the party change or what's going on? So me and him come to the conclusion that the Democratic Party has left millions of us and its other constituents by going to the extreme left. They have embraced a policy of entitlement to all, not just Americans, but aliens and foreigners. And sure, it's sometimes necessary to help or give a hand up to someone, but let us help the American citizens first and foremost and let us do it under the premise that we would like everyone to be able to eventually stand on their own 2 feet. Disabled, handicapped, mentally challenged, and others not included, of course. And so now the Democratic Party is embracing socialism or any other ism they think will give them some votes. Truly, they have left the common, ordinary people that for so many years have supported their cause. But
you know, that was back in the 70s when you came to this realization. It was actually, the party was moving to the left then, too. And they kind of came back, and then they moved back to the left now, again.
Let me give you the good news here in Florida, Penna, is that the Republican Party has had a significant increase in voter registration, over 12% in the last 10 years, where the Democratic Party has only increased by a little over 1% in those same 10 years. So the American people, and for sure the hardworking Floridians, are seeing the demise of one party and the surge of the other. Could it be that this change is taking place in other states all across this great nation? And what I'm saying here now is that the president of our president has proven by what he has said and done in the past 2 years that he has the best interest at heart of our veterans, our military, our police, our law enforcement, our firefighters, our paramedics, all of our first responders. And for that matter, every law-abiding American citizen, no matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. He has been working tirelessly, and I might add, for free, to make Americans safer and each of us more prosperous for the past 2 years. Now it's our turn to show him that we have his back. How might you ask? By sacrificing 30 to 60 minutes of our precious time to go to the polls and vote for the Republican candidates in the state and national elections. And we're definitely going to do that here in Florida. We're voting for Rick Scott to be the next senator, and, of course, Ron DeSantis to be our next governor.
Well, I only have a minute till the end of the show, but just speak a moment, because you talked about the party moving left, the Democrat Party. The candidate you have for governor there in Florida is very left, isn't he? Pretty far to the left.
Yeah. Yes, way too far to the left, and, Floridians are not going to support that. We're just not going to do it. I don't think that, myself, I'm not, but, I can't speak for everybody, but we're not going to support, that extreme ism that they got going on, whether it's socialism or any other thing. We're more, based on, what's good for the American people, and and constitutionalists like Brett Kavanaugh and things of that nature. We're about all that here in Florida.
Well, keep talking to your friends around the state, because time is of the essence.
Absolutely.
Thank you for calling.
Well, yes, you're welcome. Thank you for taking my call.
I'd love to talk to Rick all day, but we are just about out of time. And I just want to say tomorrow is the Millennial Roundtable. Nick Pitts will be here, and maybe some exciting guests I'm hearing rumors of, so you won't want to miss the program tomorrow. Join Nick and all the guests and people that he has to speak with. And thank you very much, Andrew, for all the work that you have done for this show, and also Steve and Karen. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful evening. God bless you.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.